Yeah, where is it?
It's over here. Follow me.
Uh, 30 seconds, 1 second.
Daniel Winter. Hi, Dan. We had a mutual friend. I don't know if you remember Luke Gatto.
Oh, very well. Yes, he spoke of you often. I remember very well. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, Luke, Luke passed away a few years ago.
Yes, I know. He was having troubles. It's a long story, yes.
Yeah, I know Luke. I knew Luke really well. I mean, he was a co-research partner of mine for almost 2 decades, and in the period that
Yeah.
I've been in the media. But I wanted you to know first, before we start, a little bit on my background, because I took physics when I was a student, and I came up with a theory of time dilation in those days that was proportional to gravity. And Luke might have sent you my vortex galaxy clock model that they came to me in a vision I had in the middle of the day of Tesla and Nikola Tesla and two other angels. And that was the morning of January, I think it was the morning of the same day he died, like January the 7th or the 8th. And he appeared right in front of me in the middle of the day. And I developed that vortex model. And years, many years, I worked for MIT nuclear fusion scientist Bogdan Castle Maglich, and I was around people like Glenn Seaborg, Murray Gell-Mann, and Norman Rostocker, and many other physicists in the field of nuclear fusion. And I was able to solve one of the problems in fusion, but Maglich passed away also before he could, complete his technology. And I've looked at, your phi research and vortex models, but not in incredible depth. And my audience, I'm sure, would be very interested to see what your insights are into phi and vortex research for the purpose of attaining energy and or healing. So what would you like to start with?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are some things that I can share and some things that are developing. But yeah, we think we have a serious handle on the physics. And by the way, you were definitely a hero for Luke. I remember that very well, actually.
Well, Luke was really taken by the vortex. I mean, my vortex math model shows that the gravity gravity and time are proportional, and the time is a force and not just a measurement. And that force actually causes the curvature of the warping of the fabric of space, but it doesn't require mass at all. And I find it very interesting that gravity travels at the same velocity as light, but we haven't understood varying frequencies of gravity, as in the way we measure frequencies in waveforms. And I find that interesting, that we have all these varying frequencies of electromagnetism, but we haven't done the same for gravity.
Well, I have quite a different view of those things, if you're interested.
Yeah, I am. I'm very interested. That's the
Well, I am a student of Tom Bearden, who was quite clear with equations that the gravity wave is essentially the propagating longitudinal EMF, sometimes called incorrectly scalar or torsional. And we have a very detailed physics of phase conjugation tuned exactly to Planck based on my new equations named origin of biologic negentropy, which not only predicted how phase conjugation becomes negentropic and self-organizing, but we applied that in plasma, and Therify.net is working commercially in 25 countries and is a successful multi-million-dollar rejuvenation technology. But from that view, we understand how longitudinal EMF propagation becomes gravity, but it requires understanding a few things quite simple and basic. One is that mass is simply a name for the inertia of charge rotation, and time is simply a name for the period of charge rotation. Charge rotation is the origin of both. If charge rotation becomes recursor or phase conjugate, then the propagating transverse EMF inertia enters that vortex cone precisely down the Goldenmean spiral to Planck, which my original equation originally proved is the structure of hydrogen and proof of the fractality of hydrogen and proof of the only reason hydrogen makes gravity. But at any rate, so when that propagating...
Wait, you're saying gravity you're saying hydrogen is making gravity.
Absolutely. Well, I was the first to prove how hydrogen structure is fractal because I proved the three primary radii of hydrogen are exact golden ratio integer exponents of Planck, which then I extended to the origin of negentropy in general and then proved it with technology. And we have the technology to make gravity too, but I'm going too fast here. But I'm just simply agreeing with Bearden to start that when the transverse EMF propagates.
I'm following everything you're saying, and I see definitely, like I look at engineering. So you go from theory, and Luke always talked about the longitudinal force as being gravity, but I look at that in all dimensions, all spatial dimensions. But I also
we must. I just suggest we be much more simple about it. Even Einstein figured out that gravity was indiscriminable from simple acceleration, and there's only one form of acceleration, and that is charge acceleration. So once we learned the fractal structure of hydrogen and how golden ratio permits the phase velocities to heterodyne constructively, we learn how Hydrogen produces the charge acceleration towards center, the golden ratio heterodynamic.
Towards center. Now, I like the towards center part of that. I like the towards center part of that because when I was looking at these pulses frame by frame of these UFOs that were captured by NASA's camera sensitive to ultraviolet, energies, we were seeing the camera, and at the frame rate of the camera, we were seeing these 3 repeating pulses, and you would see this ring, this black ring, shrinking inwards and forming the Fibonacci spiral into the center point of a black hole. And of course, if you transmit inward, you're going to go all the way to the Planck scale. And
well, actually, specifically, you're going to go to exactly the Planck dimension, at which point the transverse EMF is translated in vorticity to longitudinal compressional propagation. And the reason that charge acceleration is named the gravity, and it's the only form that gravity can take, starts with some fundamental understandings. One of which is that now we know the nature of the longitudinal interferometry that is the gravity grid, which is, by the way, quite fractal. And that is proof that you're wrong when you say that gravity propagates at the speed of light, because obviously longitudinal interferometry.
No, I'm just saying the standard model says that.
That's right. Oh, good. Well, we agree.
I don't agree that it only propagates at that. No,
specifically, the Raymond Chow measures are very clear. The most common measurement faster than the speed of light is golden ratio times the speed of light, which is proof of my theory of gravity, by the way. But anyway, so that longitudinal interferometry propagation is the total physics of action at a distance, which we do every day with the Therapy plasma.
Right. Yeah, the action at distance. Yeah.
Which is simply when the longitudinal EMF propagates and crosses at a distance, the transverse component is resynthesized, which enables heat containment at a distance, which is the holy grail of fusion research. But that's another question. But the beginning of this is quite simple, that phase conjugate fractality is the way longitudinal waves are produced, and therefore the way gravity is produced. Many physicists already agree that fractality produces gravity, but not one of them has a clue of what a fractal electric field is. But I have not only proved it, but we've developed at least one and now many multi-million-dollar technologies based on that. And the gravitational technology, I can only give you a few clues, but one I can tell you, if you knew why a rotating conjugator produces energy and gravity, you have a clue. Start with fullerene. But maybe you need 99% pure carbon nano, which only our group can produce. But again, that's advanced material.
Have you been able to produce any even tiny amounts of gravity where you can see
you can see the equation. We optimize the equations at fractalfield.com/propulsion. I don't know if I sent you the PDFs, but we built the equations. We made gravity with a water vortex, but then of course, if you dope that water vortex, and then if you iron powder dope a mercury vortex called the Hanabu, you can make a whole lot of gravity. But we were the first to publish the equations for why that makes gravity.
Right. But are you able to make a gravity wave that actually causes objects to fall into it or be repelled by it?
Well, we've made small amounts, but we won't be replicating any of that work because that's the Stone Ages. And the advanced work, I'm not in a position to discuss in depth here, but it has to do with our carbon nano team, which is very international. Mm-hmm. That's another question. But the way to think about that, it starts with understanding why Buckminster fullerene is the hottest subject in all of chemistry, because of the negentropic atomic space at center, which if you then rotate that conjugator, you have a clue.
Well, see, now when you look at some of these in recent Navy pilot testimonies of UFOs, if we saw a mass gravity equivalent wave coming out of the back of them, then it would cause distortion in the local space-time environment. And we don't see distortion.
Calling it a space-time distortion is crap. And Einstein
not space-time distortion, I mean physical distortion, because
well, what is bent is specifically the propagation trajectory of the rotating charge. It's not the space-time that's bent. But it starts with knowing what time is, which I don't think Einstein did. It's simply charge rotation, period. That's it. Mm-hmm. But anyway, the reason that those crafts are able to turn like this, the speed of sound and make a sudden right turn has to do with carrying your own inertial field with you. And very few physicists have a clue how to do that. But
so
very few physicists.
they're taking turns way faster than the speed of sound. That means
That's right, exactly. And the physics of what enables that is to be able to carry your own inertial field with you, which at a certain critical phase, the phase conjugate production of longitudinal is possible. But the liquid and even the Vimana-Hanabu technologies for that are crude by comparison. The other paper that's instructive, and it's information that I can share also at fractalfield.com/propulsion, is the PDF, which is the book by, you might know Bill Donovan, our partner.
Oh, I know Bill. I knew Bill. I used to have regular conversations with Bill.
Yeah, he lived with us.
Yeah,
he lived with us for a while, and then he thought Luke had some troubles too. It's a long story, but anyway. So Bill's book on Koski frost, that quartz crystal that made 800 times its own weight in gravity when pumped by a phase conjugate RF pump wave, it's famous, and the government tried to hide every copy of those papers. But wow, that is instructive because that's an example of a rotating conjugator. And that is an example of solid state propulsion that's in the literature.
How does a pilot being made mostly of water, because we're made mostly of water, how does our physiology take inertia with it so that when a pilot is in a craft and it makes a right-hand turn at 60 or 80,000 miles an hour? I mean, I've got radar data on the Navy pilots saying they clocked them.
That's an old story. That's an old story.
How would that affect physiologically a pilot, or does a pilot need to be AI?
No, actually, the opposite of AI is necessary because it takes a high dielectric material to handle the plasma densities for that level of intelligence. So AI doesn't cut it. No. But the key is the
well, what about us, Dan? Could we cut it? Could we be inside of those craft?
Let me give you I can just make a hint of how you might think about that. As a physicist studying when the Bible says during the rapture guns will melt, if you understand that, then you have a clue. It's the dielectric constant of the steel in the gun that's going to melt because the plasma density of charge implosion requires high dielectric materials.
Right. So what do you define any of the Roswell materials and what their spectral analysis is made out of, or any of the crash retrieval materials as being high dielectric, like mica might be? Like what?
The Roswell craft was relatively crude by comparison. I think a lot of those, they're the grays and they didn't know how to handle Earth's lightning very well. That's the real reason they crashed. But
depends who you talk to. Boyd Bushman says they developed a weapon that shot them down, and he showed me exactly how that weapon works.
I think that some of they call them scalar, but they are plasma longitudinal interferometry weapons, crude, but because the real phase conjugate physicists after World War II went from Germany to Russia, so the Americans were way behind on that.
So there's a good question for you in regards to these Navy pilot sightings and the Tic Tac and all of it. Do you think that's Earth-based technology, that somebody has it and they're testing it, Russian military or U.S. military, or do you think it's ET?
Well, I don't know if you've listened to Robert Wood's presentation about how the Nazis formed their alliance with the reptilians, which we now know are the Kingu, before the Pleiadians.
Yeah, I know Robert Wood. I've heard many of his presentations. And
I like him very much. He doesn't understand the physics, but he has a very useful perspective. The Kingu at that time assisted the Nazis in developing the Hanabu, which was a iron powder doped mercury vortex, relatively crude but functional way of creating propulsion. And I just was writing today in Facebook about the tragedy that the history of the USA becomes the biggest lie on the planet since the time the CIA decided to murder James Forrestal, because they were too afraid to admit to the Americans they'd lost the war to the Nazis because they were too stupid to know how a vortex makes gravity. But whether that's an ET technology is a bit of a moot question, because humans have been interfered with by extraterrestrials for obviously centuries, and that's not new information. The new information.
Do you think a craft can move through space-time, or do you think it jumps out of space-time with the vortex energy?
There's no possibility of even having that conversation without understanding how longitudinal interferometry creates a portal. And it's an extension of broad spectral phase conjugation, the beginning of which is the why Therify.net so famously not only creates healing at a distance successfully, the same way Agnihotra does if you line up the longitudinal nodes, sunrise, sunset, etc., and why longitudinal nodes reduce radioactivity measurably, as Bruce Cathy measured. But when the phase conjugation is broad spectral enough, think of Jodie Foster needed to step into a dodeca in order to have the lucid dream called contact. And so that's what's called a portal is actually broad spectral phase conjugation accurately tuned end to end. And what's propagating faster than light is specifically the longitudinal nodes, which always will be essentially fractal in their distribution. That's why you can't make phone calls.
So when you say, Carl Sagan wrote Contact, and I read the book, and in the end, he goes into this theory mathematically that pi, not phi, is the secret to the entire universe.
That's crap. That's for the same reason. They changed the movie from Phi to Pi, which was about me originally. It's a horrible movie. No, Phi is absolutely.
Yeah. So
we were the first to publish the equations that prove why golden ratio fractality is the cause of gravity, and we published that, and it's real. Fractalfield.com/vacuum energy. I presented at the International Conference Breakthrough Energy Movement this year in Amsterdam.
Yeah, I've done a lot of phi-based math on the Great Pyramid. I've taken Earth's, varying resonances, Tesla-Schumann resonance, and done a lot of phi work with them. And I convert everything to audio to sound, and I look for harmony versus distortion. But I don't have the equipment. But I do see incredible mathematics with phi. And so what I do is I generate frequencies for healing. I'm not right now in the position financially to create a gravity or anti-gravity model, but I could if I had funding. I mean, funding limits everything. Like when I worked for Maglich in nuclear fusion. I mean, fusion, actually, believe it or not, the way Maglich did it, it was all fractal geometry, the way he sent the beam into a chamber. He produced 10 billion degree ion temperatures, 10 billion degrees, and none of the heat radiated through convection because the magnetic field kept throwing it back into an implosion.
But actually, the only possible way to actually contain the required heat is longitudinal interferometry. So if he had known about golden ratio exponents of Planck, he could have figured out how to sustain that node, actually, which is the obvious holy grail of cold fusion. We have finished that. We're done doing that work. It's over. I mean, we published the equations. We've moved on.
But you got it. But have you built anything?
Of course. Well, we've got about 4 technologies that are working now, and there's another half a dozen that I can't tell you about. But yeah.
How do you get that to the world so that we all have access?
Well, let me give you the example of one that I can tell you about. So when I invented the origin of biologic negentropy, golden ratio exponents of Planck, I proved that predicted the 3 hydrogen radii, the Earth year, Venus year, galactic year, precessional year, the most important molecule in the body, ATP, et cetera, the only harmonics of Schumann and brain waves that made bliss, et cetera, non-destructive charge collapse, the only real meaning of fusion. And so then I took that equation and produced the phonon cascade, which we then feed at 500,000 volts to the plasma, which is the reason the Priory worked to heal thousands of cancers around the world. And now we understood the physics, and Therify.net was successful. And that started with a phonon cascade, golden ratio tuned to Planck. And so we feed that at 500,000 volts through bifilar Tesla coil. And that's just that's an invention that's public, and it works, and it's based exactly on that physics called the origin of negentropy, the title of my book, fractalfield.com. Mm-hmm. And the imploder.com, we just came out with a commercial version, is the water version of that water implosion. We're successful around the world for 10 years. The brainwave version of that, flameinmind.com, the EEG version is working great. The heart version, realheartcoherence.com, is working great. the gravity, the energy, those other versions that I can only tell you a little bit about right now.
So if you send a negative implosion wave, does it infinitely collapse, or does it eventually, the wavelength, shrink on itself and then spit itself back out?
Oh no, it's very simple. It's not infinite; it's infinite. Is actually more correct.
Oh, I like the way you said that. Infinite.
Well,
I love that. That's great.
That's actually literally the truth. When the phase velocity propagations reach exactly the Planck threshold, at that point, the transverse EMF becomes longitudinal. It's like a well-tuned toothpaste.
But does it send it back out? Does it send it back out?
It propagates only if it's in a permissive longitudinal fractal array. The clue is, if you go to the dodecacosa Earth grid nodes, which is the only place you can put a Kozyrev mirror and get military quality telepathy, and measure the change in radioactive critical mass, which is what Bruce Cathy did. If you understand why, then you have a clue. That's the only permissive propagating geometry. That's where the nodes stand still enough to bounce from. And that bounce array...
To bounce from, yeah. I
exactly.
understand. And then if it comes back out, you can grab it.
And that's exactly why not just the galaxies have golden ratio spiral arms, but it's been measured. The arrangement of masses in the universe are dodecahedral, and I'm the first one to explain why. Because that's the only way you can stabilize gravity.
So what do you have a structured plan to preserve your work so that if this technology reaches the civilization, so that civilization can utilize it for space travel and for infinite energy, and it doesn't get blocked? I mean, there's so many people who have been blocked. Tom Bearden, I mean, is a great example. Like, he hasn't been able to take it to fruition to the level of civilization. And when you're at the level of civilization,
he was like in jail in his later life, the Americans. And it's true that, that's why the other technologies have team members here, which I'm not at liberty to disclose.
Yeah, I understand why. Yeah,
the fact that there's a whole network of people on the planet who are celebrating the fact that there's a few technologies the U.S. military has not been able to steal. I know it's shocking. But even fully militarizing the SWIFT banking system doesn't allow them to steal everything. And I think that's pretty fabulous.
Well, no, that it is. And there's ways that Boyd Bushman showed me on how to protect yourself with a beam weapon so that nobody can touch you. But again, how do you get it to the point that their civilization now has it, and civilization has this new platform, and we can save humanity?
Actually, I mean, as I explained in my newest film, 2,000 Views the First Day, The Physics of Ascension, the propagating longitudinal array called the Ka from the Ba, or the Kesjan body, which is possible when death is a black hole. The only way to take memory through death also indicates the ability to lucid dream, which we have proven we can create with longitudinal interferometry therify.net. So that production of that body is actually the only possible path to evolution. And learning how to make gravity with that physics is only a children's introduction to what really matters. So what we're about is the educational program of using this childish metaphor to explain to people the only actual path to serious immortality. So if you can lucid dream, you have a reasonable chance of taking memory through death. And now the new information is certain plasma fields create the ability to lucid dream. Does that tell you something?
This is quite interesting. So when Boyd Bushman was a good friend of mine, and when he was alive, I asked him for the chemicals formula for the crystal in the Roswell craft that they retrieved. And he said he couldn't tell me. But when he died, he appeared to me in a dream and 3 other people who knew him, and gave us all the same answer to that question after death. And he told us the chemical formula of the crystal at Roswell that they retrieved from the Roswell craft. So what you're saying is, after death, would you have the ability, Dan Winter, if we lost the archive of your work, to send it back to us?
We were teaching the physics of why people, when they die, see the Heinrich-Clouvet form constants, lattice cobweb tunnel spiral, which is the map to dying, well known. And it's the sequence of braid geometry DNA has to do to charge implode, to propagate longitudinally, obviously. But our friend Danny Schreiber, who died, his lucid dreaming partner, returned with his memory and said quite clearly, not only did he see those geometries, but he heard the sounds, which are low frequency infrasound heterodynes. We know even what they would be, which accompany that process, a phonon geometry. It's chargeable, which enabled him to take memory through death, which is why death visions are proven by surgeons to be contagious, because it requires a black hole, basically. So achieving a coherent longitudinal propagation, Kaufman-Hesjon body, is the climax lesson of actually learning how gravity is made. Because, by the way you steer your aura when you're lucid dreaming or dead is the same way you steer a plasma vehicle, actually. It's the direction. And by the way, I think the material in that craft crystal, I mean, if we understand well, the Koski-Foss crystal, famous for making 800 times its own weight in gravity, is a simple piezoelectrically doped. And the reason it's a rotating conjugator, you're pumping the RF phase conjugate pump wave in the side that is perpendicular to the z-axis, is because the z-axis is helical, and that is the rotating conjugator.
Right. That's very interesting. Well, it's I mean, there's no way to know if what the data, I mean, you get data, you get crash retrieval, and again, you also get, I've done a lot of tests with, meters, sensitive meters, on how to trap a wave so that it doesn't get out. And most materials, even copper, you can't trap a wave. And I can block radiation just by grounding a charge plate, but that's not the same thing as trapping a wave, which...
It's called making a centripetal node. And obviously the answer to that is phase conjugate interferometry.
All right, that's what Magnus was actually telling me in the fusion. How using only steel, which doesn't
Steel
block
is not
anything.
going to help you.
No, and it doesn't help you at all. That's what I told him. It's not going to help you at all. I know metals that will help you, but the fact that none of the heat, convected to the steel and heated up the container of the fusion means the magnetic field itself.
No, it's very conventional that physicists think the solution to heat containment for fusion is magnetic containment, but that proves they're clueless to understand that you need no...
Well, magnetic will just weaken the field, because heat will weaken the field. It will
so the only real solution to that problem is a longitudinal node, and that requires... Well, there is a microwave interferometry which answers that problem. But these guys, the problem is all the good.
Well, you can get a longitudinal node with high resistance. I mean, high resistance like what's it called? Not molybdenum. It's not beryllium. No, what is it? Anyway, there are certain. You look through resistivity on the periodic table. You can see some of the Roswell materials contained a metal of super high resistivity, which would give you a big node. I mean, if you push through it, it's going to give you a big,
optically, the super high dielectrics is the solution to phase conjugate mirrors, and even Nostradamus understood some of that.
Oh, a high dielectric can produce a huge node.
Well, the phase conjugate mirror is defined by super high dielectric barium strontium titanate, for example. And the reason is because that's the media within which the Planck, or the angstrom accurate lasers converge in opposite pairs to precisely conjugate through Planck tuning. And that's the first time neg entropy and time reversal was measured. And by the way, by time reversal, they actually simply meant neg entropy, because you couldn't go backwards in time toward disorder, only toward order.
See, what you're saying, I understand most of what you're saying, Dan. I've seen, like I said, I've looked at this data of this footage of these, what I call the NASA UFOs. I mean, they're UFOs that NASA captured on ultraviolet sensitive cameras. And I see the negative entropy. I see it. And the fact that you can see it is quite interesting. Maybe it's hydrogen. Maybe there's a fluid there, because a fluid response is much slower than an electromagnetic response. You can't see an electromagnetic response with a camera, but you can see distortion. But when
my advice would be study a ball lightning plasma toroid and figure out why it responds so well to telepathy. Then you'll have a clue.
well, it doesn't have any. If you're very low mass, you can respond to telepathy.
No, it's because the center of that toroid is conjugating into a longitudinal propagation accurately, which is why it responds so well to telepathy. And by the way, any of these crafts that are made of metal that you're studying to learn about propulsion is like the Stone Ages. It just tells you those ETs are from the wrong side of the tracks.
Yeah, see, that's a really good distinction, because not all ETs are using materials in whatever they figured out that are as advanced as others. I mean, there are crafts that are pure crystal. They're of some.
Well, the ones that are made of genetic material are the interesting ones.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're going to be incredibly advanced. I mean, but the fact that they can move, we still can't move. I mean, we're fighting everything when we move a vehicle, an electric car. We're fighting everything, so we're wasting all of our energy on the fight. Inertial.
But that's why longitudinal propagation, actually longitudinal wave propulsion makes every other form of transport on this planet look like the Stone Ages, and it should. But until we understand what enables lucid dreaming and therefore successful death, we're not entitled to understand those things, actually.
But I'll tell you an experience I had the other day, Dan. So I'm working with, this kind of physics is incredibly simple for somebody like you, but I came up with the theory that the staff of Moses is an antenna, and it's a monopole antenna. So I calculated the frequency of the length, because his staff lay in the Ark of the Covenant, 2.5 cubits times 20.605 times 4 is my wavelength, speed of light, in inches divided by that. So I got my frequency. So I'm working with these frequencies in my body. My spine has mostly calcium, which is cubes and pyramids on the geometric scale. And I go out of body, and this was 3 nights ago, and suddenly I'm in front of the stars of Orion's belt. I'm sitting in front of them, and I'm in this, what looks like in the lucid dream, a clear crystal windowed craft and I'm sitting in front of the 3 stars, and the 3 stars tell me there's another force and that you haven't discovered yet. And they tell me where it is. And the stars suddenly dim down, the 3 stars of Orion's belt, and what's sitting in front of me are 3 white stones in their places, which they're using as a metaphor to where this hidden force is. And as I think of that, I think of what you're saying about dielectrics. Is there a property, is there a material that is high dielectric in stone? And is there a reason the ancient Egyptians used granite in the cores of the main?
I think, again, a suggestive metaphor here. I work with Vincent.
I'd like to see your interpretation of my dream, because
I understand. I'm going to make a suggestion now, if I may.
Yeah.
When Vincent admitted, he was kind of a reincarnation of Flamel and Kelly and Dee, that they were grinding up the Kaaba stone of the Mad Caliph of the Muslims, and that was the original red powder philosopher's stone. And that was a super high dielectric, and about enough of that for a grain of rice. They
were grinding up the Kaaba stone?
Oh, it's well documented in history. Yeah, but half the mass disappeared at the time the Mad Caliph let them grind it up. But
I didn't know this.
Wow. Well, and then enough of the size of a grain of rice with wax as a wetting agent, and if your mercury is the right temperature and right array, it induces the phase conjugate charge collapse, named alchemy. And the gold that Dee and Kelly delivered to the Queen, the Royal Society of UK, is the purest gold that was ever measured on the surface of the planet to that time, actually. But the point being, why would the Kaaba stone be a super high dielectric material? And if you understand the physics of meteorites, that there's many types, but the ones that are interesting are glass meteorites. And the only metal that survives inside that glass during meteoritic heating is the platinum group metals, gold, platinum, and palladium. And when that gold propagates through the glass in the right temperatures, it forms a foam structure. And that foam structure allows the phase conjugation to be broad spectral in the right spectra. And that is the trigger for the non-destructive charge collapse, named the Philosopher's Stone, otherwise known as the physics of pure intention.
Wait, because I got to tell you something. In my dream, the white stones, one of them went in my hand and it turned to something as clear as glass or crystal.
Otherwise known as Lucifer's Eye. Now, the physics of why that's the Philosopher's Stone has to do with the fact that there's very few ways in those days of making super high dielectric materials. And that is simply a waveguide for perfected charge collapse. And perfected charge collapse is the answer to everything.
Right. I believe it. I believe exactly what you're saying there. I understand that.
Yeah.
That's funny. Yeah. You have, yeah. So that's my dream. My dream, I even heard the words Philosopher's Stone coming from the three stars. And I said, well, I know I've heard of alchemy and the Philosopher's Stone, and I read those books on Roberto Magnus, 40 years ago. But
so most of the gold of Egypt, they actually made.
So how would you manufacture the highest grade dielectric? Are you saying the Kaaba is the highest grade dielectric
available at that time?
Available at that time.
And I think there were phonon issues and alignment issues and the magnetic alignment. I mean, there's some other issues and temperature issues. Actually, my partner Paul Harris verified.
Have you ever seen quartz wool?
Pardon?
Quartz crystal string, like wool. They call it.
Oh, rock wool. Rock wool is.
No, it's pure quartz crystal. Here it is. This is a roll of pure quartz crystal string. It's military grade stuff.
Oh. Not really.
Would that have a high dielectric?
No. High dielectric is a measurement of the efficiency of the production of capacitance. And so the formula for constant dielectric is simply you measure the microfarad of capacitance, the insulator between the two metal plates, and divide by the area and the thickness. And the higher the dielectric constant. The thing that's very instructive is that if the dielectric constant of a capacitor is high enough, that device is by definition a 0-point energy source device.
Great. Can you describe the Hall effect in your words?
Well, the Hall effect is simply a measurement of magnetic flux density with a sensor. It doesn't really, and the sensors doesn't really require super dielectric materials. A Hall effect sensor is simply measuring magnetic flux density.
Would a mercury crystal have a high dielectric?
No. No, barium strontium titanate is a good example. Well, the reason the dielectric constant is essentially a measure. If a capacitor has a high dielectric constant, that means when you hit that capacitor with a hammer called voltage, it rings like a bell. And when the dielectric constant is high enough, it rings like a bell forever, which is why the Sufi is the master if he can make the perfect.
You know what's so funny? As you're telling me this, Dan, have you seen the new Thrive Part 2? And
I was so disgusted with Thrive Part 1 that I avoided, but maybe.
Oh, you're gonna be really disgusted in Part 2. I mean, I don't know how Nassim has gotten so much money.
Well, actually, Elizabeth Rauscher, after she spent a whole day telling me what a problem Nassim was, admitted that he did have one skill, and that was fundraising.
No, I know Elizabeth. She was in my living room, and we had this conversation. She had to read all of his papers, that none of them made any sense.
Yeah, actually, she has credit, because the paper he published on golden ratio and Planck and black holes, it was her mathematics, actually.
It was her. It was all her. She's the ghostwriter.
Yeah. But we flew her to Europe a few times, and we funded her. It's a long story.
She's gone now.
Yeah, but anyway, her
has she been able to communicate to you through lucid dreaming from the other side, Elizabeth?
I didn't attempt that. You know, she was, I would say, sadly, not very coherent, really. And a lot of the people who had that aspartame addiction have that same kind of psychosis. And I tried to explain to how serious that was.
Yeah, her diet was really, she was quite brilliant, but her diet was yeah. Also another, I don't know, do you know, okay, so I got to sit on at the Berkeley National Lab with Lawrence Berkeley National Lab with Glenn Seaborg and Albert Ghiorso, his assistant. And Ghiorso and Seaborg were particle hunters. They were looking for heavier and heavier elements, these guys. And you should look up Ghiorso if you don't know him, because he's in a way far more brilliant than Seaborg, who won the Nobel Prize for, you know, plutonium with Macmillan. But I got to tell them about my UFO sighting. You know, I was born in 1961, and I grew up in Berkeley, California in the 60s. And in 1967 or 8, I saw a flying saucer that the Berkeley lab would have had a perfect view of, because, and the space lab up on the Berkeley Hill. So I was telling both of those guys about it with Magwitch. And Seaborg said to me, if you have anti-gravity, you have an energy source far beyond nuclear fusion, and we're wasting our time with Magwitch's fusion.
Exactly. I agree with that, man.
And he said,
it makes everything else looks like the Stone Age. Is exactly what I said.
yeah, fusion's a waste.
By the way, rotating conjugators.
So, yeah, I mean, so tell me, here's an incredible thing. So anyway, you should look up Ghiorso and the particles that they were finding in the heavier and heavier mass. But what you're really looking for is the ultimate dielectric to produce that massive longitudinal wave. Is that correct, or is that not correct?
You know, the dielectric material is critical to phase conjugation in the optical spectrum.
The material.
Yes. But there are many other spectra in which phase conjugation is possible. And the more broad spectral the phase conjugation, the more potentially negentropic to the point of stargates. And there's phonon, there's microwave. Microwave is the area within which physics needs to learn their lessons next. And that does not require super dielectric material.
Do you think a magnetron, I think the magnetron is one of the most untapped potential, you know, engineering feats. We're not even using a fraction of what can happen in a magnetron. I mean, one thing that I've been able to build, and I've seen this happen, Dan, and maybe you can explain it, but I built a wave trap out of an incredible material that can trap a wave. When you trap a wave, you get quantum tunneling events. And I had a light bulb.
Quantum tunneling is the name for embedding perfected. Entanglement is embedding perfected, which is by phase conjugation is the climax form of, absolutely.
So you get phase conjugation with
yeah, and that means you essentially, gravity exists because the transverse charge compression finds a way out through the speed of light into longitudinal propagation because it's phase conjugate and tuned to Planck. And so that's the way you pull the plug down the drain. So when Einstein said gravity is infinite non-destructive compression, what he meant was that the compressed charge has a way out. And that is longitudinal propagation, basically. And that's why you can make gravity with that kind of structure.
So when you are you saying if you can trap a wave and you open up a quantum tunneling event, you can make gravity?
Well, quantum tunneling is a crude intro to the physics of longitudinal
propagation. Yeah, there's very little known about it. I mean, I read some of the oldest physics on quantum tunneling events with, it wasn't Niels Bohr, no, it was, trying to remember the physicist, Luke and I, Dirac. I like Dirac's approach to quantum tunneling events, but I think there's more there than we can possibly imagine. And in the early days, Bell Labs was funding this kind of research. I mean, I had an old dusty physics book this thick, and looking one by one.
Bell Labs is the one who did the Koski Frost, and then the U.S. government stole that book out of every university library.
They did, really?
Yeah.
No, they were doing incredible research, and some of the data was like they didn't even know what to do with the data. They were just doing experiments, real physical experiments in those days, and nobody does this anymore.
I mean, they were all going to be like, the blind guy feeling an elephant until they knew why an object fell to the ground. And since none of them have a clue why an object falls to the ground, of course they're stupid. I mean, excuse me.
Well, of course, no, we're it's like cavemen. So I'd like to hear your explanation. I mean, we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I'd like to hear your explanation for the mercury found in the Central American pyramids, and what would be the purpose of a pyramid in mercury?
Because propagating a phonon wave for mercury was the mechanism of propulsion for most of the ETs at that time. And that's
at that time, yeah. And that would still be primitive. The mercury would still be primitive compared.
That's right. And that was true of the Nazis too. But the reason you have to have an iron powder doping the mercury to make it the famous red liquid for the Hanabu was because the mercury has high inertial constant, and that's why we can make a little bit of gravity with a water vortex, and you make mercury a little more. But now, if you dope the iron powder with a secret solvent into the mercury, make it red. Now you have magnetic flux density in parallel with the high inertial density. And that vortex, just like Schauberger's vortex, makes gravity if you tune it right. And that's where you have the angle of that vortex, the speed of the vortex, et cetera, become implosive. And that's an introduction to the physics of why the US lost to the Nazis.
Wow. So you think they really did have the flying saucers in Antarctica, and they really did have
sure. Robert Woods, I just published it today on Facebook. Check out my Facebook today. All the articles that are there. But it's the thing and that's what I say, that was the turning point when the whole history of USA became the most poisonous lie in the history of the planet, when they decided to murder James Forrestal rather than admit the Americans lost. And they lost because they didn't know why that vortex made gravity.
And for people who don't know, James Forrestal was the head of NASA at one point, or?
No, well, he was Secretary of Defense at that time.
He was Secretary of Defense at that time, right?
And he was the only guy in the whole MJ-12 team who insisted that they admit to the Americans that the Nazis just shot down the cream of the American Navy with Byrd at the South Pole, and realized, we lost.
Yeah. But where is all that technology today? Where?
That technology is a secret space program. I mean, read the Gaia series. It's still going. The thing is that by lying to the American people for half a century or more, it created one of the worst schizophrenias in the history of the planet. Plus, the Americans.
If they have this technology, and I've seen lots of evidence of the secret space program, and I know people pretty high up in the government. Why would they let Earth just go to hell like this when?
No. See, at that time, there were millions of the reptilian kingus underground. The Pleiadians took out most of them, and we've corroborated that. Actually, they were helped by the high Alpha Dracos. But the humans were being parasitized by lots and lots of different groups. And by the way, the difference between being food for a parasite and not is whether you can charge implode.
Right. No, I fully see charge implosion. I've seen it in the data, Well,
it's the physics of human bliss, and that's the beginning of getting a longitudinal wave, which is the only way to lucid dream and take memory through death.
Right. No, I've been meditating every day for 45 years, Dan, and now my meditation is massive, boys. Massive.
Well, that's great. I suggest you measure your EEG with flameinmind.com, the best EEG technology for teaching the necessary golden ratio harmonic series on the planet.
Can you say that again? The name of that?
Flameinmind.com, my invention, the best brainwave tech on the planet. It teaches you to make the necessary golden ratio in the EEG. And now we're measuring the kids who can see without their eyes and teaching them, which also is the beginning of longitudinal propagation, which also, by the way, teaches the kids to see the elementals and nature spirits. It's plasma.
I'm having children late in life. I'm 59, and I've got a 5-year-old and a 10-year-old who's turning 10 tomorrow. And the things they've reported to me, like my daughter Lyra saw in this one house we were renting. We're in Canada now. We used to be in Sedona. She saw beach ball-sized balls of white come into her room and start blowing all the papers and her curtains around, and we know another young boy here in the Kootenays of British Columbia who saw a 30-foot ball of white, hovering above his dad's barn at 2 in the morning. So the question is whether these kids are seeing something that if another person was standing in tandem with them wouldn't see, right? But
if that person were making the brainwave power spectra indicating the trance state necessary to achieve seeing without their eyes, which is essentially, again, longitudinal interferometry, and we teach that. It's basically a combination of golden ratio and octave cascade from alpha to gamma. That's what that is by measurement. And that's why.
Yeah, I've experienced the whole field can see. You can have your eyes closed and you can,
exactly.
all of a sudden a being shows up and you know you're seeing it because you're not holding it like an imagination image where
exactly.
you can only hold it for so many seconds and it goes away.
The actual organ of perception, the organ of perception is the conjugate point in the plasma, and that does not need to be in your head.
Mm-hmm. No, I can see this seeing is occurring. Like I went through, okay, so I had these blinding visions of Christ in 1994. I guess I was 33 or so then. And after that, my third eye was so open, I was seeing spirits all the time. And I was trying to determine, Dan, how I was seeing this. And I clearly deducted it's not invisible wavelengths of night. I'm not seeing everything in ultraviolet or purple. And one day, I'm lying in bed in Sedona, Arizona, with my wife, and the neighbor comes home, and I can see the red taillight on his brake lights through the wall. But I wasn't seeing it with my ocular senses. I was fully seeing it through the field. And I saw it hit the brakes, and the light went right through the wall, and I saw the shape of the brake light. I'm saying, how am I seeing his brake lights?
Remember, the longitudinal interferometry will pass through about anything, including a Faraday cage. But the only place the nodes can be sorted is the place where they conjugate and compress. So where there's a compression point in the nodal array, that is the organ of perception itself. And that's what you take, for example, the physics of remote viewing and astral projection.
Wow.
What is projected?
That's
what is
what you're saying there. Wow.
And the proof, here's the proof of that.
Well, that's real seeing. The universe itself has eyesight.
Oh, absolutely, but only at the longitudinal fractal nodal array and not elsewhere. Here's proof that all of these things will work better where the magnetic lines cross. All of these things, which is the only place you can have a cozy rev or a cathedral or a labyrinth, or effectively birth and death is successful, and where radioactivity, critical mass is reduced. So, and it also, like Agnihotra, work better at sunrise or sunset or equinox. And all of those are the right angle propagation points of phase conjugation, just like phase conjugate optics requires a square.
Mm-hmm.
So that is the proof. You experiment with that, you'll find you can actually create that perception.
It's interesting what you're saying there about the equinoxes and the solstice, because in 1986 and 87, I had this out-of-body experience 2 days in a row, December 22nd and 23rd, where I was taken through the 7 levels of heaven. I made a recording of that experience, and I always found it interesting that it occurred on December 22nd and 23rd in 1986, and why the winter solstice. And you're saying there's openings that...
Well, the right angles are the enablers of phase conjugation. It's very simple. Any optics laser guy can tell you that. Mm-hmm. And because that's what allows the pine cones to kiss noses accurately. You can feel your hair stand up if you do Agnihotra at that moment, precisely sunrise, sunset, because you got that right angle. And,
right.
The farm turns into Garden of Eden if you do Agnihotra correctly.
Right. Wow. Wow, incredible. Thank you, Dan, for giving us this interview. You're really a precious genius that the world needs to spend a lot of time with. So well, I know...
There are more YouTubes of me teaching than about anyone else on the planet.
Is your channel back up again? I heard your channel might have been down.
No, we have 20,000 followers on YouTube, about 20,000 on Facebook. It's all the indexes, fractalfield.com. You can see all of the index there on YouTube.
Yeah, we have at least 10,000 people on our list that'll get this, and they'll be able to, and that's good to tell them where to go. Shiroz, maybe we can put a visual link to his YouTube channel or a hyperlink into the video.
Yeah, the index is all at fractalfield.com. I'm happy to share.
Yeah, thank you, Dan, for this interview today.
And thank you for helping, Shiraz.
Yeah, thank you, Shiraz.
Stick around and ask you a few more questions?
Sure. I got a couple minutes. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Well, I'm not a physicist like David is, so they won't be physics related. But I used to watch your videos way back when you used to talk about the Merkaba, and you used to have meetings with people and share about the dodecahedron and how our astral form is also that form, and to form the Merkaba to meditate and to raise the vibration. So can you talk a little bit about that subject?
Well, Goldenmean.info/Merkaba. What's clear is visualizing a tetracube around your body as any cubic lattice being only octave harmonics is perfect for charge isolation and terrible for charge distribution. Right. So it is good to start there, but if you don't finish, then ultimately you become simply food for parasites, as those who did too much Merkaba without too much hex without the pen, you become food for parasites, a serious astral hygiene issue. Now, the moment at which you feel you're ready to die or have bliss, which means your memories are shareable, no anger, but require no secrets. At that moment, then you can visualize the accurate 32-degree tilt of the chin angle of the Sphinx, which is how you embed tetracube rotating into pentodeca.
Wait, stop there for a second, Dan, because I just did this math on the Sphinx. If you take the Great Pyramid slope angle, 51 degrees, 51 minutes, and 14.3 seconds, and you divide it by the golden ratio, you have the angle of the Sphinx.
The reason it's 51 degrees is because it had to be golden ratio harmonic series. But just to finish.
But the slope angle of the Sphinx's face, I think it's 32 degrees. So
no, but the slope angle of the Sphinx's chin is 32 degrees.
That's what I mean. So take 51 degrees, 51. So you go and you do that in 10 base. So you got to convert it to 10 base. So you take the Great Pyramid slope angle in 10 base, divided by the golden ratio, and you have the slope angle of the Sphinx's chin. And I tried that with Coffray's pyramid, and it's off, but it's with the Great Pyramid.
But the reason is that that when you tilt your chin at 32 degrees, that's the angle a cube is tilted from the floor to rotate, blink 5 times, and you have pentodeca. And then your vision goes from hex.
So that's the secret to the Sphinx.
Absolutely.
That's 32 degrees.
Yes, and that's the moment at which the spine liquid pump turns implosive. It actually releases the spine liquid pump, the axial tilt, and that first enables implosion. Up to that point, there was no implosion. There was only charge stasis. Perfect for storing charge, but no distribution. But the thing is, Drenfeld taught one thing right. He says, don't do it until you know you're ready. It's the same thing.
This is really deep, because this is the secret to the Sphinx. And so if you take the Sphinx's slope angle to 32 degrees, and it's almost perfect. You take the Great Pyramid's slope angle, and you convert it to 10 base, because 51 degrees, 51 minutes, 14.3 seconds, convert it to 10 base, divided by the golden ratio, 1.61803398887, everybody. You've got the slope angle of the Sphinx's chin. And Dan is saying that's the angle. Oh my God, that's freaking huge. But it's not related to Coffray's pyramid at all. It only works with the Great Pyramid angle.
And the secret is you can't do that well until you don't need secrets, and that's the psychology of perfect bliss. But let's finish Shiraz's question. Sorry.
But oh my God, I'd like to see the geometry.
Goldenmean.info/Merkaba. Go ahead, Shiraz.
I will read that. So then the angle of the face matters.
It's a chin angle. It's the axial, because at that point you visualize, instead of a hex, a pent. You know, the witch uses a hex to fix and the pent to send. And
so you take your protractor here, and then you got
it. That's the good physics. But the thing is, the psychology of that is that the reason is the same reason you cannot take secrets through death, because the DNA has been in the business of assembling a shareable wave, the collective unconscious communion of saints, Akashic records, for 1 billion years. And that electric field, perfectly fractal, is only perfectly shareable waves. And so if you haven't sorted your emotions, you're not ready for that or bliss or death.
Okay. So yeah, my meditation is such that I'm extremely emotional right now in my meditation, and it takes me to a place of happiness, but it's an extreme emotion. And what I wanted to also ask was you mentioned the Kaaba. I'm Muslim, by the way, and you mentioned the Kaaba and the stone of the Kaaba. But when I think about God and His omniscience and omnipotence, and I think how God is everywhere and in everything, and you know the entirety is God is in you, and you are in God. Then why does it have to be a certain stone or a certain material?
It, it was symbolic of the place where charge collapse is enabled by symmetry. And in those places in a nodal ray, for example, the heart of the human or the heart of the sun, where the maximum number of waves can converge, that is where negentropy occurs. That negentropy is not only the name for God, it's the name for mind. So there are certain places. For example, inside an aluminum building with electrosmog, God is not so present because conjugate compression is not possible. So actually, God is only introduction to the laws of physics of charge distribution. Actually, that's where mindfulness is possible.
Wow.
You're not going to find him in electrosmog in an aluminum building. No, it was always done in a cave until now. Now we know how to make a phase conjugate structure.
That's very true. That's so true. I'd love to, you know, go down this path with you at another time. I know
I send blessing. Let's do this again. Really, I appreciate.
Hey Dan, what is the dielectric of sapphire? I just Googled that. Does it have a high dielectric, or is it sapphire?
Sapphire?
Because sapphire is an aluminum O3 crystal.
Yes, I don't think it's that high, actually. I believe there's some piezo there. High dielectrics require a sandwich geometry where there is a precise fractal analog between the molecular array and the atomic array. And that's why physics does not understand what makes a phase conjugate mirror work. But the Olmecs did. It was an obsidian mirror. That's the trick Nostradamus learned to put the coating on the bottom of his scrying cup.
Wow, right. Wow.
I have to go, guys.
Okay, thanks, Dan. This has been wonderful. Thank you.
Love you guys. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye. This went really deep. I wish we had keep your part. I think it was a great question because it back into the Sphinx and the chin angle of the Sphinx.
Yeah.
And how that's related to the dodecahedron and the cube. So, but you know, the problem is getting geometrical models that people can see, because I can see in my mind what Dan is talking about geometrically, but I don't think a lot of people can do that. But they're just, believe me, you put this on YouTube, I mean, you put this on Facebook, and this is going to create, you know, because it's not easy to interview Dan Winter. It's not easy.
We were really,
because you have to know what to ask him.
yeah. Well,
And I knew what to ask him.
My experience with him and my study of him was all meditative. It wasn't physics, right? It wasn't any of that.
Well, the physics is also conscious, you know.
Absolutely.
You know, once your mass to weight charge is down to zero or anywhere near zero, the power of the brain can interface with the craft.
Right.
But he's saying it has to do with the phase conjugate and the vertical wave. I mean, Luke always told me, our mutual friend Luke Gatto always told me it was the vertical. You know, the vertical wave is generated by resistance, right?
Right.
So when you watch, a good example of that, and you should keep the recording on now, is when you watch waves on a lake and they hit a dock.
Right.
Right, and the dock is resistance, and so the wave goes up. It builds the vertical wave against the resistivity. So you have to have high resistant materials to produce a vertical wave. But he's saying high dielectrics are better than that.
Mean.
What?
What does dielectric mean? I'm not familiar.
Well, you can Google it. I mean, the Hall effect tried to explain it. I mean, a mica, for example, which is in granite, has, I mean, it has a dielectric. I mean, everything. Oh, there are many materials. Let's see, mica. I did experiments with mica, dielectric. You can see his interpretation of my dream. Mica is a silicate mineral found in granites and other rocks, is frequently used as an electrical insulator in electrical application. In mica capacitors, mica is used as a dielectric material, mica. This dielectric material opposes the flow of electric current or electric charges. Now, when you oppose an electric field, the vertical wave builds.
Right.
So you think of that wave coming and approaching the dock, and it hits the wooden dock, and the wave is forced upwards. So if a dielectric is opposing an electric charge, it forces the vertical wave, which is really your amplitude on a wave.
Wave hits the dock. Is it forced upwards, or does it choose to go up?
The resistance forces it upwards, yeah. So, and then the wave pushes back on the other waves trying to come in, and you get lots of little waves, right? So that means that means resistance is increasing frequency.
But that
so how
has no will of its own. It's actually being forced by the hitting against the dock.
Yeah, but it doesn't just increase the vertical, it also increases frequency, because when the wave kicks back on the other impeding waves, they crash into each other, and you get tons of little waves, which is your frequency, right? So if you imagine you have this long wave coming along and it comes into high resistance, the feedback from that does this, and then you get all these little waves, and you'll see it as you watch the dock. But then the dock moves, right?
Right.
Which means part of the force made it through.
Right.
It actually caused the dock to vibrate itself,
Right.
and then the dock sent a wave in that direction, which is the direction of the original wave. But most of the wave went up initially, but then it feeds back. But he's saying a dielectric, and keep this for the audience, what we're doing now.
Yeah.
And that's why I brought up mica, because in my dream, standing in front of the 3 stars of Orion's belt the other night, and the light of the stars dims down, and I see 3 white stones. And then when I pick up one of the stones, it turns into clear material. Now I don't know. Mica, pure mica is quite clear, right? But he's saying that there's way higher dielectrics than mica, right? But mica was an early dielectric. And in the early days, some things like diamond, for example, diamond is an insulator, right? They thought it was an insulator. But then later, when they do more experiments, they find out highest dielectric material is actually the best insulator. See, insulators and dielectrics is what I'm saying were the same, but then a dielectric has another purpose.
You know that experience you shared about the vehicle lights that you saw through the wall?
Mm-hmm.
Similar experience, but not with seeing, but with hearing. I was able to hear, like, in a tall, like, 24-story building at the very top what they were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Right after I was meditating in my car.
Right. Well, because sound waves, part of it goes through the wall, part of it goes into the wall on the quantum level, and part of it reflects back off the wall.
Sense then.
But to be clear, what Dan and I agree on is the collapsing or inward wave. Eventually that wave reaches the quantum scale. And I was going to ask him the time that it takes to reach the Planck scale, and then what happens at that scale, and then how the energy from that scale sends itself back out so that you can capture it.
But that's my question, though. Why does time even matter?
No. It's really deep stuff. Time to me in physics is an actual force. It's not just the the periods on waves are measured in time, but
Right.
the periods are the periods between the peaks of waves. But when you get higher frequency waves, you get more peaks. But I believe the peaks of waves
But they
are
that
in a geometry are all interconnected by a force. And remember, the peak is the vertical wave. It's the vertical, but there's a vertical motion and then there's period. We call the peaks of the wave periods
right.
between them. But that's just a unit of measure.
But that's just also a perceived thing, isn't it? Because when it's not a wave, it's a dot. And so if you're perceiving the dot, then it's timeless.
So you can Google, this is a good thing for people to do after our conversation. What is the highest dielectric material? And I immediately thought of diamonds, because diamonds were considered originally, because they're carbon, insulators.
Right.
So I want to know, I'd want to know from Dan what he thinks of diamonds as dielectrics. And you know, again, developing the technology that comes out of mathematical theory and engineering it is another thing, okay? And then getting real results. And that's why I asked him, did you actually get a gravity wave that distorted, you know, objects? So if you have a gravity wave imploding and you put a non-magnetic material next to it, it should respond if you have any significant gravity there. So he said his early experiments, they had a small amount of gravity, and there's ways of measuring that, but how these UFOs are moving, it gets into a deeper subject, because if there's a gravity wave there, then the gravity and mass are proportional, then the gravity wave is going to affect mass.
Right.
Anything in its way is going to get hit by that gravity wave. And we don't tend to see that with these UFOs. We don't tend to see any damage.
Right.
So a high-powered mass, but he's saying that the phase conjugation can explain why there is no damage. And that's a, you know, a subject for next time. So I'll have to put together some questions for him for next time.
Yeah, absolutely.
But again, is diamond a dielectric to the level that we're talking about? And then you have to look at the crash retrieved materials that are very exotic materials and test them as dielectric, and test their resistivity, right? Their resistance. And it's bismuth. I was thinking of bismuth because bismuth has super high resistance.
Right.
And if you apply force, electrical force to bismuth, then you're going to get a good vertical wave because of the resistance. But I also have to check bismuth for dielectric properties. Bismuth has a low melting point. It melts at low temperature. So it made me wonder, like, why would the Roswell craft or any crash retrieval have a lot of bismuth in it? It doesn't make sense because it would melt so easily. Right, it would have to have no temperature at all. There couldn't be any temperature there. But it's nice that Dan said we should do this again. I mean, when he gets time.
Okay.
But that's great, show. So run. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Hey, Daddy, you want to see our secret spot?
Yeah, where is it?